Number 8. Ford Galaxy 500. In 1970, the Ford Galaxy 500 outsold the Ford Mustang. That sentence requires no embellishment and no additional context. The Mustang had been the most culturally significant American car launch of the 1960s. It had produced a film, a racing legacy, and an advertising campaign that redefined how Americans thought about what a car was supposed to communicate about the person driving it. And in 1970, Ford's conventional full-size sedan, the 6-passenger, V8-powered, bench-seat-equipped, column-shifted Galaxy, sold more units than the car that had started it all. The Galaxy's position at the top of Ford's lineup for most of the previous decade had given it a dealer presence and a buyer familiarity that the Mustang's youth market positioning could not replicate. American families chose the Galaxy because it seated 6, started reliably, held its resale value on the used car lots where their neighbors shopped, and did not require an explanation. By 1974, Ford renamed the configuration the LTD, erasing the Galaxy nameplate and transferring its buyers to the new name without changing the fundamental car. The Galaxy is at number 8 because it outsold the Mustang in 1970, the kind of fact that automotive history has managed to make almost completely unavailable. Number 7. Mercury Marquis. Ford built 2 versions of the same car in the 1970s. One of them is in automotive history books. The other one is this. The Mercury Marquis was the badge-engineered full-size Mercury, mechanically identical to the Ford LTD, built on the same platform with the same V8 engine options, the same interior dimensions, and the same fuel economy numbers, positioned at a slightly higher price point to serve buyers who wanted to be seen at a Mercury dealer rather than a Ford dealer. The distinction between the 2 cars was available in the trim level specifications and almost nowhere else. Mercury dealers sold the Marquis in 6-passenger sedan and station wagon configurations throughout the decade, and sold them in sufficient numbers to justify its continuous production across 8 model years. The buyer who chose a Marquis over an LTD had made a decision that the parking lot could not verify and that the neighbor across the street could not detect. The Marquis is at number 7 because it sold at scale on a badge distinction that the engineering did not support, and because the car that hundreds of thousands drove has generated so little interest that most automotive histories omit it entirely. Number 6. Dodge Coronet. The Charger got the Dukes of Hazzard. The Coronet got the school pickup line. The Coronet sold more. The Dodge Coronet was the mid-size B-body Dodge that American families chose when they needed more interior space than the Dart's A-body could provide and more fuel economy than the Monaco's full-size platform required. It shared its B-body platform with the Charger and the Roadrunner, the same architecture, the same engine options from the Slant 6 to the 440 in coupe, sedan, and station wagon configurations that the Charger and the Roadrunner did not offer. Fleet operators, taxi companies, and suburban families who needed a mid-size station wagon that held 6 passengers and a week's worth of groceries chose the Coronet across its 7-year production run, with the specific pragmatism of buyers who had decided that the correct choice and the interesting choice were not the same choice. The Coronet is at number 6 because it was the mid-size Mopar that the majority of Mopar mid-size buyers actually purchased, the B-body that sat between the A-body's compactness and the C-body's scale, and that served the American family's actual needs more completely than either of the cars that the Mopar community discusses when it discusses the B-body decade.
Number 5. Pontiac Catalina. The GTO got the magazine covers, the Firebird got the Trans Am poster, the Catalina paid Pontiac's bills. The Pontiac Catalina was the entry-level full-size B-body that occupied the bottom of Pontiac's full-size lineup, priced below the Bonneville, optioned below the Granville, and sold in annual volumes that exceeded 200,000 units through most of the decade's first half. Police departments across the country ordered pursuit-rated Catalinas with the 455 cubic-inch V8. Taxi companies ordered them with the 400. Families ordered them with the 350 and the bench seat and the turbo hydromatic and the AM radio. Every year that the Pontiac GTO generated automotive journalism, and every year that the Firebird generated showroom traffic, the Catalina was the car that justified the Pontiac dealer's lease payment and the Pontiac division's operating budget. It was in more American driveways than the GTO, in more fleet lots than the Firebird, and in more rear-view mirrors on American highways than both combined. The Catalina is at number 5 because it kept Pontiac operational throughout the decade, and because the car that funded the cultural moments the brand is remembered for has been so thoroughly erased that most people would not recognize one in a photograph. Number 4. Plymouth Satellite. The Plymouth Roadrunner outsold the Plymouth Satellite in the automotive press's coverage of the early 1970s. In actual American showrooms, the Satellite outsold the Roadrunner in every single year of their shared production. The Satellite was the mid-size Plymouth that buyers chose when they needed a B-body in coupe, sedan, or station wagon form, at a price that did not include the Roadrunner's performance premium or the Roadrunner's insurance surcharge. Its 318, 383, and 440 engine options gave it performance access across the full range of what the buyer's budget and insurance agent could accommodate. Plymouth's own advertising for the Roadrunner, the cartoon bird, the horn, the stripped-down performance premise, drew buyers into the showroom who then, in significant numbers, signed purchase agreements for satellites. The car that the advertising made famous was the car that the sales data showed losing to the car the advertising mostly ignored. Number 3. Pontiac Le Mans. The Pontiac Le Mans outsold the Pontiac GTO every single year of the 1970s. The GTO has the legend, the posters, the collector prices, the cultural identity that the muscle car era produced and that the subsequent decades preserved. The Le Mans has the sales receipts. The A-body Le Mans and its successors served the buyer who needed a mid-size Pontiac at the mid-size price, the car between the Ventura's compact and the Catalina's full size, that the American family with 4 people and a budget that placed the Grand Prix out of reach chose as the reasonable, available, appropriate option. Pontiac's marketing for the decade focused on the GTO, the Firebird, and the Grand Prix, the cars that communicated aspiration and performance and style. The Le Mans communicated none of those things. It communicated adequacy, which, in the context of what most American families needed most of the time, was more useful than aspiration. The Le Mans is at number 3 because it outsold the car Pontiac celebrated in its advertising, and because the car whose sales subsidized the GTO's cultural legacy has been so completely erased that the fact of its leadership over the GTO requires a moment of recalibration even for people who know both.
Number 2. Chevrolet Bel Air. Between the Biscayne and the Impala, there was always the Bel Air. The Chevrolet lineup in the early 1970s offered 3 levels of full-size B-body. The Biscayne at the fleet specification bottom, the Bel Air in the middle, and the Impala at the aspirational peak. The Biscayne was the car that government fleets and car rental companies purchased. The Impala was the car that American families purchased when they wanted to communicate something. The Bel Air was the car that American families purchased when they wanted to communicate nothing except that they needed a full-size Chevrolet and had calculated the Impala's premium against the Biscayne's austerity and found the middle position mathematically correct. Chevrolet discontinued the Bel Air nameplate in 1975, folding its position into the Impala's lower trim levels. Number 1. Oldsmobile Delta 88. The Oldsmobile Delta 88 was in more American police fleets, more suburban driveways, and more family road trips throughout the 1970s than almost any other car the decade produced.
Law enforcement agencies chose it in pursuit-rated configuration for the same reasons they chose the Dodge Monaco and the Plymouth Fury: the B-body platform's structural integrity, the 455 cubic inch V8's sustained high-speed capability, and the Oldsmobile dealer network's fleet procurement process, which had been refined across decades of institutional buying. Families chose it because it was the Oldsmobile below the 98 and above the Cutlass, the full size that provided everything a family required without the 98's price. It was in the driveway next to the house with the basketball hoop, in the church parking lot, in the fleet lot of every county sheriff's department that had not yet committed to the Ford or the Plymouth. And today, most Americans cannot describe what it looked like.